Hello. Here we are. It's Yoga Sutras time. And let's see. We are looking tonight we are doing Yoga Sutras. We're doing the second section, Sutras 10 and 11, which is dealing with the subtle thoughts in chapter 2. Remember, in chapter 1, we talked about what is yoga and abhyasa and vairagya, attachment, non-attachment, and stabilizing the mind, predominantly about stabilizing the mind. And then this last section talked about all the high outcomes that come from that. And then we talked about the gross colorings. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the subtle. So this entire process that Patanjali outlines just goes gradually subtler and subtler and subtler. And then in here, the internal is seen to be external in chapter 3. And we witness the subtle transitions. And we go subtler and subtler and subtler with Somnium. Okay, I know that's not a thorough introduction, but this is what we do. We sort of juggle these things around, and it's one of the challenges with the Yoga Sutras. It's so thorough, it's so broad, and it's so deep that if you dive in one place, you have to somehow mentally remember some aspect of what it was that you just left behind. Sort of like, I think of it a little bit like juggling balls in the air. You have to juggle them all. Hello, Jeff. Hi, Scott. There's Ma. I didn't ever get an answer from you, Ma, so I just did it this way. Hiya, Joe. Hello, Hashim. Guten Morgen. Unless, Ma, you left me a note and I didn't see it. Okay, I see that note, but I don't understand the meaning of that. So I don't see. I see that you're on Facebook Messenger. That's all I see, Ma. I'm sorry. That's the only meaning that I get there. You didn't answer the question I was asking, so I just presume I'm going ahead with where we are. And if you're going to change that, you'll let me know. Anyway, so here we go. Here is the all right, well, that was the question I asked you. You didn't tell me that, Ma. That's the problem. I posed the question and you did not answer. All you had to do was answer me one way or the other. Joe sent an S, the letter S. No, Ma, you did not. I'm not going to hash this out here. Yeah, I am here. That means I am here in the Facebook Messenger, but that didn't answer the question. It's up to you now what you're going to do. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started here, and I'll keep an eye on that, what you do. Now deal with the subtle thought. Now the subtle thoughts are dealt with. First, the mind was stabilized, and I put highlights to a whole block of the sutras there. Then the gross colorings of the thought were attenuated. Now, obviously, saying they were attenuated does not mean that we did those sutras at the beginning of the first 9 sutras of the chapter, and now all the thoughts were attenuated. It's just a way of choosing the grammar. Now the subtle colorings are dealt with both in this section and the subsequent sections of chapters 2 and 3. Okay? Once the gross coloring has been minimized through Kriya Yoga, that's the first 2 sutras of this chapter, and the intensity of the colorings have been attenuated, the thought patterns are brought back to the seed or latent form by the process of meditation. This is a very important section here, these 2 sutras, but it's only 2 sutras, but it's very profound what is being said here. Eliminating those of mere potential. Once the colored klishta thought patterns have been reduced to mere potential or seed form, those seeds are eliminated when the mind itself temporarily seeds back into the consciousness from which it arose. This is likened to burning the seeds, and burnt seeds cannot grow. So remember, the instrument of mind itself recedes back. First, we're dealing with thoughts. Remember, I didn't link it here, but remember that Patanjali defined yoga as chitta vritti nirodha. And most of us, when we look at a translation of that, we say it has to do with letting go of the thoughts in the mind field. Well, most of us have a day-to-day sense of what it means to let go of thoughts. That's those impressions related to my activities of the day, my attractions and aversions that I know about in that conventional way of thought. We think, okay, so I'm attached to this, that, or the other, and that's what it's talking about. Whoops, there's the Joe S. Hi, B. Hi, Govinder.
Hi.
Hi. Oops, I'm going to do this the other way. I'm going to take you out and this out so I can arrange these in a different order. I'm going to bring her back momentarily. There we go.
There.
And now when I put this up, when I put the sutras up there, we can do this, and it sits on top of us. And I think that's a little easier to see. Anyway, so type some comments in the box if this is, I want to make sure that what I'm saying there is making sense. That when Patanjali says chitta vrittis, most of us think that it's my thoughts of my things in my world, my external worlds. I'm attached to my house and to my car and to my bank account, my job and my friends and all of these identities that I have. Most of us think of these as being vrittis. But what we fail to note when we first start looking at the Yoga Sutras is that the mind itself is vrittis. That's a little hard to understand, but the way that the seeds of the other thought patterns are attenuated and go beyond the seed level is that the very mind itself is vrittis. The ego, ahamkara, is vrittis. Even buddhi is vrittis. When we get to the end of chapter 3, if you hold this concept in mind, when we get to the end of chapter 3, we see that finally we even let go of sattvic buddhi, because even it is nothing but vrittis. And then and only then can we experience purusha truly. Now, in the meantime, when we're doing our meditations, yes, we have intuitive glimpses of this that are profoundly enjoyable. But it's the intuitive awareness of the fact that I'm Purusha, but we have not yet gone beyond the mind. That's not a complaint. It's not a criticism. I'm just saying it's an observation that's useful to be aware of, so that we cannot accidentally hit a plateau and say, okay, I've got it all figured out now. I'm intelligent, I have a high IQ, and I understand these Yoga Sutras. I'm sorry to say that I hear this happening from people and say, I don't need to do sadhana anymore, I'm finished. Know it all. Anyway, I don't mean that to be negative, but it's something important to be aware of. Then this is likened to burning the seeds, and burnt seeds cannot grow. What is the tool for doing this? The actual tool of dealing with the subtle colorings is the 8 rungs of yoga. Now remember, here we're talking in these 2 sutras we're looking at now, Sutras 10 and 11, is Patanjali introduces the first part of this chapter. First, you deal with the gross colorings, tapas, svadhyaya, ishvara, pranadhana, kriya, yoga. and all of the levels of the 5 kleshas, and that's the grosser level. And now he's introducing the concept of dealing with the subtler levels of vrittis. Now, he cannot force fit all of the remaining sutras into these 2 sutras. You just can't do that. So he's introducing the concept of attenuating the subtle vrittis here. And then what you and I have to do is, based on that foundation, is move on and go ahead and do the meditations, the processes that deal with the subtler essences, the karmashaya, the samskaras themselves. In a similar way to what we're doing in the last few times we get together, we stabilized the mind. We stabilized the surface level of mind, the conscious mind. Why? So that we can start the process of attenuating the samskaras. And so the actual tool dealing with it is the 8 rungs. I'm going to click on this very quickly so we can look at it. The 8 rungs, blah, 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 blah. The 8 rungs are the codes of conduct. And the sutra above here, Sutra 26, I should have linked 26 here instead of 29. Clear, distinct, unimpaired, discriminative, light, enlightenment, knowledge is the means of liberation. Note that this is Sutra 26, and we're only looking at 10 and 11. Again, you have to be mindful about how all these work together. The block of sutras at Sutras 12 to 25 is pretty long, but contained within that is the discussion of samskaras and the field of samskaras called the karmashaya. The question then comes, how do I gain liberation from that field of samskaras? How do I move beyond that mind and all of those samskaras? The answer is here. It comes from viveka. This is a key word. It comes from viveka, and viveka leads us to the freedom from that. It's viveka khyati is the means or method. Okay, you're making some noise there, Ma. I don't know what it's about, but it's not terribly loud, but it is there. The last 3 rungs of the subtle form the subtle tool called samyama. Note that that's in chapter 3, which is used. I use the metaphor of like a surgeon's knife to cut through the illusory false identities. So again, that's where we're learning about the subtler aspects. Samyama is the finer tool. We'll just take a quick look at this. This 3-part process of dhanana, dhyana, samadhi, when taken together, is called samyama. And note that these are rungs 6, 7, and 8. So we're using this very, very sharp attention to explore within. What are you doing, Ma? You're making noise. You're the only other microphone. There, okay, now I made it quiet, but now I can't hear you. Thank you. All right, I'll keep a look, and if you have access to the comments box, if you want me to turn you on, tell me. I'll look. I'll keep looking for you to see. Are you looking at it, Rojo? Okay, if you see Ma wave at us, tell me. Anyway, so through the mastery of that samyama, the light of transcendental light shows we achieve mastery. And the 3 parts gradually, here's a key part. This samyama is gradually applied to the finer plane states or stages of practice. It's 7:15. This is the principle here. And then that allows us remember, by then we already have the foundation of viveka kyati, the viveka, the discernment. We have the foundation by the time we get here to this Sutra 6 of chapter 3. By the time we're actually applying this, we already have an understanding of avidya, of confusion of self and not self, and we have a foundation understanding of viveka. So the viveka, the discernment, this is not an intellectual thought out process. It's just sort of immediate. It's making sense slowly, Scott says. Good. That's all we can hope for. That's why we keep slowly going through this stuff. It gradually starts to make sense. And so we don't have to analyze this with our intellectual mind. We're doing this. We're sitting on our butt in meditation, and one of these very subtle aspects of reality comes forward. And in a flash, non-verbally, in a moment, non-verbally, inside, we recognize that we're not there yet. I am not Purusha yet. We don't think about that in words. I don't sit there and think literally, oh, wow, this is not Purusha. Rather, it's just not what I'm looking for. And I automatically sort of instantly let it go. And this is why when we start to experience the unconscious mind, we want the unconscious to come forward so that we can intentionally not get sucked into it. I'm trying to loosen this up here. So we can intentionally not get sucked into it. And then gradually we realize our true nature. And note that Patanjali again in Sutra 4 says, Vritti Sarupyam Itaratra. When you're not in self-realization, we become identified with the vrittis. And so this is what happens here in this stage when it comes, instead of getting sucked into it, involved with those vrittis and identifying with them, we just instantly let them go. And so that's here we were looking at this. There are some other articles that help with this, and everything that we do is an attempt to get this to make sense. Here's the sutra itself, and these 5. I have a little piece of a bean stuck in my throat. It's a little layer of the covering of a garbanzo bean, and it's sitting there hanging there in my throat. That would be very nice. Thank you. Rojo's going to get me a little water.
Your water bottle.
Huh?
Your water bottle is on the way.
The water walla.
Water bottle.
The water walla is on the way. Thank you. Four stages of activity and attenuation were described in Sutra 4. The subtlest of those 4 stages is when deep impression, samskara, is in seed form. However, there is another step beyond the impression being a seed, which could regrow, thank you, Rojo, under the right circumstances.
But not in your throat. That's a bean, not a seed. Although it is a seed of the bean plant.
Yeah, it's not a seed in my throat, it's a bean. It's a bean skin.
Mm.
Very helpful. Thank you, Rojo. Okay. A seed that has been singed can no longer grow. It's a metaphor that is used for this. Burn. Now note here, I'm adding this because this is what we have been taught and it's accurate. But Patanjali at this point is not using the term burned. It's okay. We're understanding it. A seed that has been singed can no longer grow regardless of circumstances, regardless of how much fertilizer and water is supplied. Again, just a metaphor. So if it goes back to seed form, it's not active at all. So if you think of your favorite junk food that you gave up eating some time ago, and it's still in seed form, all of a sudden in the right circumstances, you can get involved with it again, and you're off doing that again. That noise is still coming, Ma. I can't figure out what it is or where it's coming from.
I don't know either. I'm just having my laptop on my lap.
It's going.
I can put in some earplugs. I mean,
It sounds almost like a motor running or something.
does that change anything?
Yes, it seemed to make it go away.
Okay. Then it's probably just the sounds the laptop makes.
I see. There, that's much better. Okay, so dive in whenever you want. Resolving into the cause is like playing with clay. This is just another metaphor way of saying this sutra explains that the colorings of thought patterns and the mind itself are resolved back into the cause from which they arose. Imagine that you have a ball of clay from which you make a little statue of some animal. So you sit there and you manufacture, you turn it into a little doggy. Then imagine that you roll the clay back into a ball and then you make a little cup from the clay. Is that bing coming from you, Rojo?
Yeah, I've got this on mute, but my boss keeps texting a group. So every time somebody replies back to...
You get a bing. I didn't know if that was coming from you or me. Finally, you roll the cup back into a ball of clay. When the animal and the cup are rolled back into a ball of clay, this is like the animal and the cup resolving back into their material cause. Remember, elsewhere we've talked about the three gunas of Prakriti, and that the three gunas of Prakriti come out of Prakriti. So everything arises from the formless ground of Prakriti, and then it resolves itself back into the Prakriti. It's that principle. The same thing happens with both individual thought patterns and the mind itself. When a memory arises, it plays around for a while, then it resolves itself back into the mind field from which it arose. And if you think about this, all of us, every one of us already know this. Some thought pattern, some memory of something you were thinking about comes to your mind. We're in the middle of this conversation right now, and all of a sudden a memory pops up into mind of some other activity. Rojo's sitting here hanging out, we're talking Yoga Sutras, and meanwhile something pops up on her cell phone, and that takes her attention. We all know that. And then as she drops that, what happens to her thoughts about that text message? It recedes back into the unconscious where it came from. That's the principle. And we're all living this all the time. So in some sense, we already know this. It's just we're trying to learn to do this consciously at meditation time, not merely to let go of the surface level thoughts, but to allow the mind itself to recede back into the formlessness from which it arose. This rising and falling happens every day as we move from waking to sleeping states of consciousness, usually without being fully conscious of the transitions. In the case of meditation, the difference is that this receding of mind is done consciously, being fully aware of the transitions or receding process. Just a brief note here. When we get into chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutras, there's some sutras in there that talk about the transition process itself. And when we talk about that, maybe we will remember back to this. And this is the way in which all these sutras work together. Imagine that you meet some new person who has a very negative attitude that you find offensive. The memory of that person is stored in the basement of the mind. Whether you think of that, and this is just a footnote, whether you think of that in terms of neurological storage in the brain or storage in the subtle mind beyond the physical brain. I add that note there just to say that some people say there's no such thing as this religious consciousness. You people are all crazy. It's all created by the brain. And I'm just trying to say here that these principles and practices relate to everybody, even someone who says, I don't believe in any of this. All I believe in is brain neurons. Well, this process that we're talking about operates for those people too. So it doesn't matter whether you think of this as memory in neurological stuff in brain neurons or in a subtle mind, a field of consciousness that is beyond the physical brain. Either case, it still works. The memory of that person is stored in the basement of the mind. What is that memory made of? What is the stuff of which it is fabricated? Once again, whether you think of it as subtle mind or gross brain, the stuff of which the memory trace is formed is already there before it took the shape or form of that person and the coloring of your aversion. Somewhat like clay exists before you form it into a pot or a statue. So the stuff of which memory is made was already there, whether it's a bunch of brain neurons connected to each other or it's a subtle level of prakriti that's prior to or deeper or beyond brain and brain neurons. I hope that principle is making sense. Now let's go on with the story. Now we're thinking about that person. Now imagine that through some process of actions in the world and meditation, you weaken the coloring of aversion. It is as if the mind goes back to its former state prior to the imprinting of the memory of that person. However, the difference is that you now have a mere memory, one that is devoid of coloring. There just is no longer any coloring. You still remember that person. Previously, there was the memory and the coloring. So there was that person who you just met, and there was the coloring of aversion towards him because you found him having a negative attitude and seemed offensive. Now there's a memory of a person, but the aversion is not there. That doesn't mean it's replaced with love, except in the sense that you see this person as Purusha. Now there's only memory. Where did the coloring go? It receded back into the mind stuff from which it was fabricated in the first place. In my little mental fantasy of pondering that, it's like there's a little man in there with a paint bucket, and he's walking around painting all the memories to say, this is a good person, this is a bad person, and all like that. So the paint that the little character is walking around doing, the paint and the paint bucket came out of the prakriti or the brain neurons or however you want to hold that. But now the memory of that person is still there, but the painting has been removed. It's like he came around with a scrub brush and some soap and water and washed away the paint or the coloring.
That's a really nice subtle point, Swamiji, to remember, like, where's the clusters coming from?
Yeah.
Where does it go back? Where does it go back into?
Yep.
Really nice.
Yeah, it's an attempt. One of these days you will animate it and make it make sense where people can really see it. In the meantime, there's a storyboard line of way to do it.
Sometimes when the uncoloring happens, we are afraid of, there's nothing much left after that when it's all gone, but the mere memory stays, we can still use, in the sense, we still know that 1 and 1 is 2, we still know that this is a cigarette and this is a, a not so nice person, all that, but the emotional reaction, but the fact that Prakriti, in a sense, is this unlimited ball of clay, as you say, out of which everything can be manifested, including the coloring. It's really nice.
Let's see, Raj showed up.
Yeah, he had some technical difficulties, he was saying.
Oh my, internet problems, but happy to join. Finally. And Raj said, hi, Mom, up in the middle of the night. Yes, you are up in the middle of the night. All right.
Should go take care of it.
All righty. So let's see what we got here. I'll put this back here like this. Now, get ready to this. What if, in addition to that, the mind itself, manas, receded back into the basement of the mind field called chitta, from which it arose? Let's see what I put here for chitta. There's the chitta. It's the 4 functions of mind article. That's what I went to there. I did not, somehow I did not link that to the total things. What if, in addition to that, the mind field, the mind itself, manas, receded back into the basement of the mind field, the chitta, from which it arose? To understand the receding of the mind, it is important to first understand that the mind, as manas, is an instrument that has arisen or manifested out of the broader field of mind called chitta. And all of that is prakriti, which is like our symbolic clay. So first, out of the clay was fashioned a chitta, then there was fashioned a manas and an ego, and those moved outward as memories of people and all that kind of stuff. The suggestion of this sutra is that when the mind recedes in this way, the other colorings are also removed at the same time. If the mind is in this state, then it simply cannot experience any such colorings. The entire field of mind is still at peace, non-existent, so to speak. It is from that deeper stance, that the deeper meditations are experienced, and the samadhi, and the kaivalya, the absolute liberation.
And those
yes?
Instruments themselves can be colored as well, because we label them as mind. Right?
Yeah, we get, exactly, yes. We get attached to our instruments.
Yes.
Particularly our ego, huh?
Yeah, so with this process to even do samyama on the ego, on ahamkara as an instrument, then removes the clashes.
Yeah. Sounds pretty far-fetched, doesn't it, everybody? But that's essentially where we're going. That even the instruments of our typical normal thinking, even those are vrittis in the chitta. When we speak of dissolution of the mind, it does not mean that the mind, manas, has been permanently eliminated. From a practical standpoint, notice how difficult it is to meditate when the mind is noisy from many thought patterns. It is only when the noise subsides somewhat and when concentration becomes very focused that meditation itself can come. Then, after that letting go and focusing, the mind, manas, which is the instrument of thinking and operating senses, can itself let go, subsiding back into chitta. So the mind has to finally allow itself to resolve back inward. And this is the big time, is the abhinivesha, the 5th klesha that was talked about in the last section of sutras. Abhinivesha is the fear of death. And so it's the fear, in some sense, ultimately it's the fear of complete annihilation. I don't want to lose my mind, humorously lose my mind. But this is ultimately, this is what we do. But the good news is these instruments, we do not permanently lose them. They switch back on. After you come out of your deep Turiya samadhi meditation, you come back out and you're still the same charming personality that you were all along. And so it's not the end of us. It seems to be. This is why when it comes to the simple way of saying what meditation is, calm the conscious mind, then allow the unconscious to come forward, become non-attached to that, and then go beyond the mind. And it's very common that the first few months or years, whatever, meditation seems very, very nice. I have a nice calm mind. And then all of a sudden is coming old memories and stuff coming forward. And we get angry, say, what happened to the old days when my meditations were so sweet? And now I just feel angry all the time, and I'm afraid all the time. These things are going on. It's troublesome. And what's happening is the unconscious coming forward, and we start to be afraid of the loss of me. It literally gets stronger and stronger, and it's I don't want to die. This is the abhinivesha. Here's the good news. This temporary receding of the mind has the effect of fully releasing any of the otherwise disturbing thought patterns. Afterwards, the mind returns to be able to handle the matters of the world by using the senses. So it's not permanent. It's temporarily suspended. And you have a really, really nice, rich, deep meditation.
And I was remembering the first of this chapter where this Kriya Yoga ends with the third part is the Ishvara Pranadhana. So everything receives back into the source.
Yes, everything receives back. Exactly right, Ma. Good reminder. It links back to the principle of Ishvara Pranadhana, which was introduced in Sutra 1 of this chapter. Tapas Fade Ishvara Pranadhana Kriya Yoga. And this was the reason for Om as introduced in the 7 or 8 sutras in chapter 1. We spend a lot of time talking about Om. And recall that there it says that what it has to do with is Ishvara Pranadhana.
Now, and this letting go is not a doing. So, I mean, even if it's totally terrifying, then if there's an understanding that this needs to happen, then what to do, which you can't, to let that happen.
Yeah, particularly if, or I should say, after we've had a few of these experiences where there is the fear of letting go of something and we discover, wow, I lived through it. Nobody died here except an old habit pattern. And after we've been through that a few times, we start to see the pattern, realize, wow, this is pretty cool. And it's okay that old stuff comes forward. And I don't have to be afraid. I am not going to die. I missed that earlier. I don't know exactly what you're referring to. Jeff said, I just started noticing some of that. I thought I quieted the mind, and then I started to hear another layer of chatter. Surprise! That's wonderful. I'm happy for you, Jeff.
Yes.
I know that's not a comforting comment. Matri can tell you about that.
Then you know you're screwed.
No, you're screwed.
And you just got to keep going forward.
You got a troublemaker like me saying, wow, how neat. I'm happy for you. You think you're going crazy, and here's a troublesome old man said, wow, I'm happy for you. Sound familiar, Ma? Yep, that's the way this deal goes, though. Let's see, where are we here? When the modifications, this is just the sutra that goes along with the one thing that I have wondered, one of these days the intuition will come or will be given to me. It always seems to me like Sutras 10 and 11 should be presented in the other order. But they're not. They're presented in the order in which they are. When the modifications still have some potency of coloring, when they have been attenuated, referring back to previous sutras, when they have been somewhat attenuated, they are brought to the state of mere potential by meditation, by dhyana. And it seems like that Sutra 11 should be in the place of Sutra 10, and Sutra 10 should be in the one of 11. But for whatever reason, this is the sequence, I'll flip back here, that Patanjali introduced this. When they're in their subtle form, they are then destroyed by the disappearance into the field of mind itself. So it seems like first we ought to know what to do with, there's some potency. They're brought back to the state of mere potential by seed, by meditation. And then we're going to have the mind recede. Anyway, but it is the way that it is. And there's our vrittis. And then they are overcome by the process of meditation. The previous sutra described how the colored thought patterns, klishta vrittis, that have been reduced to mere potential or seed form are transcended by the temporary dissolution of the mind. Before that, in Sutras 1 to 9, the means of weakening the gross level of coloring was described. Now this current sutra describes the process of how those somewhat weakened klishta vrittis are further weakened into into mere potential by meditation. And this is what we're all familiar with. All of us are familiar with this, is sitting quietly at meditation time, allowing the thoughts to come, not falling for the trap of pushing them away. Oh, how do I get rid of these thoughts? And sitting there, allowing them to simply be there and gradually weakening. Looks like Mr. Patanjalis' editor screwed up. I'm tempted to think like that, Raj, but I tell you where I keep coming out, and this I have found to be the best mental stance to hold with these Yoga Sutras. It's tempting to say, well, Patanjali or his editor screwed up. But when I have felt like that over the years of hanging out with this in the practical way that we're trying to do it, when I have felt like that, I say to myself, instead of he made a mistake, I say, maybe he's right, and there's a subtle point being made here that I'm just not prepared to see yet. So let me not be too quick to say he or his editor is wrong and I am right. So when I just said that to you about Sutras 10 and 11, I'm not saying it to say that I'm right. I said it, might not have said it clearly. It always appeared to me that it ought to be the other order. I think it's probably done in the perfect order, and it's just not clear yet why.
The only thing I can see, and it's not that I exactly know how, but because in the last part of the previous chunk, he's just talking about each of the kleshas and what they are. So then he says, well, they have to recede into the mindful itself, but if that's not happening, you have to do meditation.
Yeah. Well, that could be a part of it. And another part of this, and I think this is a part of it too, what you just said. It's talking about referring to the kleshas, because that's where we just come from in the journey. Mm-hmm. And we've also talked about the attenuation. And so, when they are involved, it's carrying forward on where they were. And so when they are fully attenuated and they're in seed form, then what happens? Then what happens to the klesha, like we were talking about? What happens to the klesha and what happens to the seed when it gets burnt and the klesha is gone? They mirror back to then they are destroyed. This is the process by which it happens. And then comes along. So anyway, I think that's probably part of what to do with it, but I still have a little piece of my mind that says, well, we ought to bring it back to mere potential because it still has some potency. So we ought to bring it back before we can receive the mind. Loud noise again, Ma.
Yeah, I hear it too. I have no idea where that's not what I hear from my computer.
But when I click the mute button on in my control panel, it goes away. See, now it's just beautiful, quiet. Maybe it's Matri's Vrittis.
That's transmission somehow, huh? Maybe.
Your computer.
Somehow.
Your computer is picking up your Vrittis. Oops, now it got quiet again. Nirodha. Where did you go, Nirodha?
Please do that with my mind field too, Swamiji.
Done. The previous sutra described how the colored thought patterns, kleshta vrittis, have been reduced to mere potential or seed form, are transcended by the temporary dissolution of the mind. Before that, in Sutras 1-9, the means of weakening the gross level of coloring was described. Now, in this sutra describes the process of how the somewhat weakened kleshta vrittis are further weakened into mere potential form by meditation. The process works something like this. 1, stabilize the mind from the last chapter. 2, weaken the gross colorings. 3, bring the colorings to seed form, and then resolve the colorings back into the mind field. The previous sutras. It works. This is why I said it works somewhat like this. And so then we just keep doing sadhana. We keep practicing. This sutra is a dividing line. This is me speaking. The later sutras in this and the following chapters extensively describes this process of weakening the subtle colorings. In a sense, this sutra and Sutra 10 form a dividing line between the work with the gross levels of the I'm sorry, Ma. I had to weaken you. I couldn't even talk. It was getting so loud here. In a sense, this sutra forms a dividing line between the work with the gross levels of mind and the subtler explorations. So note here as a memory that in chapter 1, we worked on stabilizing the conscious mind. Then the early part in this chapter here we're looking at, we addressed dealing with the gross levels of what's going on in the mind. Once we have stabilized the conscious mind, then we deal with the gross levels of thoughts. And now we're working on the subtle. And the whole rest of the sutras is dealing with the subtle aspect of mind. So again, the observation here, this is simply like a dividing line between the work with the gross levels of mind and the subtler explorations. This is the main important point of this is that we all want to go forward. We want to go beyond this dividing line. Otherwise, we end up accidentally, not intentionally, we end up accidentally, in effect, doing nothing for years, if not decades, of stress management style of meditation. All we do is calm the physical body, calm the central nervous system and the brain, and it's a very nice and wonderful and useful thing to do. But we entirely miss out on what this thing is really all about. And so we want to explore the subtle aspects of mind so that we can move past that avidya and actually have the self-realization, have the kaivalya, realize the Atman or Purusha or self. This is a very useful principle to be aware of, as it can greatly help one to grasp the overview of the Yoga Sutra. Take a look at the summary page from this perspective, and it will be clear how the forthcoming sutras are directed toward the weakening of the subtler klishta vrittis. I don't remember what I have linked here. Oh, this is the summary page of the whole thing, which is basically meaning our list of the 39 sections. It will be clear how the forthcoming sutras are directed toward the weakening of the subtler klishta vrittis, which was introduced in chapter 3 here. They're the 5 kleshas, okay? So everything else is about reducing the kleshas. And so that's the end of this section. Okay, I'm going to try and see if your sound is going to work there, Mom. That's weird.
Is it gone?
Who is the Cookie Monster? The Cookie Monster is back.
He was saying that when the sound was going.
Oh, that was the Cookie Monster?
Somehow.
That was the Cookie Monster.
That was
being
making light of.
That was the Cookie Monster was back.
How somehow in transmission the sound is.
And so then Johnny also adds the nasty parts aren't so subtle sometimes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. They're not so subtle. But the thing that is their cause is subtle. Remember when we're talking about when something really nasty comes forward and is blasting out here, it's because the samskara has come to life and now it's out here at the gross level in the conscious mind. And that's why we're working first to attenuate the gross level. And it's very often, it's easy to think, well, I'm dealing with the gross level of this nasty part and it's not bothering me, so now I have dealt with it. And rather than eliminating the samskara, and this is a positive comment, it's not a complaint, what we have in effect done is we have attenuated the klesha. It's important to attenuate the klesha. When it's nasty, the more I look at it, Johnny, the more I like your phrase. When we are experiencing the nasty parts of those things, that's the gross level. And this is the spirit of what's being talked about in that first block of sutras of this chapter 2, which is on sadhana. In the sadhana, in chapter 1, we attempt to stabilize the conscious mind so that it's reasonably still and quiet. And then some of those nasty things still come forward into the gross level of mind there, the gross level of the kleshas, and we need to attenuate them in the process that we talked about in that section. And then what we want to do is we want to attenuate and burn the seed, the samskara level of that nasty thought that was not so subtle. So not so subtle, aren't so subtle, your choice of words, the phrase aren't so subtle means gross. That's the first block of sutras. And now once we've attenuated down, and it is attenuated, and now it is the subtle level, now we can do meditation, we can do samyama on the roots of that otherwise nasty part. Understood. Good. And I know you mean that. It means it makes sense. There's a real reasonableness to this, isn't there, Johnny? It's quite incredible, I think. I just continually become more and more amazed and respectful, personally, of these great sages who came before us that experimented and figured this stuff out, and then were kind enough, compassionate enough to leave it for us. And this long lineage of yogis who have passed it down over and over and over again. So I get the joy. I have the joy of spending days walking along the holy sacred Ganges in India, in the Himalayas, with Swami Rama, having little fragments of conversation about all this stuff. What a joy to know that that's where this came from. And then I, in my own little way, I'm no Krishna, I'm no Buddha, I'm no Christ, I'm no Swami Rama, but I, in my own way, get to do this kind of thing with you and be a part, to be a small part, admittedly a small part, but at least to be a part of this phenomenon of sharing this stuff with other people. And I think that's pretty cool. So, yes. Anyway, I'm going to take the word understood off there. So, all righty. Anybody got comments or questions? Ma, yeah, anything to say there? Your sound has stopped, so now you can speak.
The nice thing, or I don't know if it's nice, but when the seed really is burned, you just don't remember that it doesn't pop up anymore. So it can be a long time before you realize, oh, I used to be like this, and it really has gone. Or
yeah,
it's just because it's burned. It's not.
I remember now. I don't have it. You just reminded me of something. I don't even remember now exactly what I was thinking about at the time. But hi, Terria. In my late 20s, I had this insight come to me, and I had sort of inherited, not with genes, but I had the potential in me of some pretty not nice habits that came from family and childhood and like this. And I remember the words that came to me internally was, and I didn't know exactly how to do it. I didn't know yoga yet. I didn't know Swami Rama yet. I didn't know tradition yet. This kind of help had not come to me yet in my life. But the phrase, now this is an American English phrase, a dollar bill is called a buck. A $1 money thing is called a buck. Now, I don't know where this phrase comes from, but there's a phrase that says the buck stops here. And often this is said in an organizational sense where you have a hierarchy of people and the problem goes up the chain and finally gets to some level of management and somebody says the buck stops here, I will solve the problem like that. And so this happened to me in my late 20s. And I was aware that I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know how to do it. And it was an internal thing. That internally, I said to myself, I don't know how to do it, but the buck stops here. I will do something different, and I will follow this thing that's been in my heart for as long as I can remember in this life, this unknown magical something that is pulling me. I'm going to do that, and all the other potential negative stuff, no. I just said no. I said, and the phrase was, the buck stops here, and that's the principle, and this is the way. And when I say this is the way, I don't mean that everybody in the world has to be literally practicing the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. But the more we understand the subtleties here, like when Johnny just said that about nasty parts and says, okay, understood. When more we understand this process that we keep learning and practicing, my experience has been that the more I can see it in every religious book of the world that I run into, that it's there in those books. And it makes me realize that there are yogis. I don't know about President Truman. Anjan said something about President Truman. So I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't understand the implication of President Truman. Anyway, so it must have some meaning. Maybe you can write me later and tell me about President Truman. Anyway, so we gradually see that this stuff is universal, and it's pretty cool. Say something wise, Mom, or anybody else.
I think I just did. That was my final, that was another thought that I had about that when it's really uncolored, we don't miss it because it's gone. Yeah. And so that's just good to know. We just get lighter and lighter.
Oh, buck stops here. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt first used the term the buck stops here. That's what Anjan was saying, that President Truman was the one who said the bucks. President Truman was the one who said buck stops here. And Johnny says, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who was much earlier in that century. Truman was in the 1940s, I think. And Teddy Roosevelt was in the 19-teens, I believe, or somewhere thereabouts. Anyway, but the buck stops here. And so for me, it was in the sense of lineage of people. I'm not going to pass on negativity. I don't know how to do it, but anyway. So these principles do seem to be universal. So let us pause there, and we will consider next time that we're together, which now to Guru Yoga Sutras will be Saturday. And I don't know, I want us to be able to go through Sutras 12 through 25 in one shot. We'll probably take the whole hour. I didn't know if we were going to take a whole hour to do this, but it was nice conversation. And thank you, everybody, for putting some comments in there. Helps the conversation. Thanks, Ma, for your additions. But that next block of sutras is loaded with stuff. I thought about breaking it into two parts. It was Truman, says Roz. Okay, we have a battle going on, Johnny. Take them on. It was Truman. Rosalind has probably Googled it and checked it out by now. But anyway, so thank you, Mr. Truman. The buck stops here. I didn't know who to say. But anyway, that next block of sutras is pretty loaded. But we'll try to go through it in a way so that we hit the highlights of it and get it to make some practical sense for all of us, okay? And I hope this is fun going through this in this way. And I know we're...
Next week, I'll be sitting next to you.
Next week, Matri will be here. And tonight is Wednesday. Tonight is Wednesday night, right? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And next Wednesday night, we will have a Raj en route to come see us. Thank you, Hashim, for being up in the middle of night with us. And there's Hashim with his hands. that says something not about the rest of us, but it says something about Hashim.
It does.
Which I honor.
Mm-hmm.
And Swami Mommy. Yeah, I know someone else who that people around her used to call her Swami Mommy.
That's cute. It's the first time.
Yeah. Swami Mommy, first time you heard that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Catch up on it later. Okay, Rosalind. Okay, bye-bye all.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for playing, everybody. And there's an Om from Joe. Let's let the Om have the last word. What do you think? We can end with Om. Remember, Om Tat Sat. There it is, the silence after the Om. It's off the page over there. Say one moment here, Ma. I'm going to put it that way so everybody can see. There's the Om Tat Sat. There it is. Okay. Bye-bye. Wave, Ma. See, Ma's over there. I have to point to her. I have to point over there where she's not. But if I do like this, then on the transmission, I'm pointing at her. Bye, Ma. See, I'm waving at her. Bye. Wrong direction. The other direction, Ma.
Bye, Swamiji.
Bye. Okay, here. Give me 5. There, that's pretty close. That was pretty good. Okay, bye-bye all. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful next meditation. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, I'm pushing the button now.